This is WDET, Detroit's NPR station. My name is Hearns Laguerre Jr., and I'm here with David Allen II, the retired wildlife biologist and environmental consultant, and Susan Campbell, environmental journalist and communication specialist. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So both of you guys authored this book, Paper Valley, The Fight for the Fox River Cleanup. Why did you feel it was important to take on this fight in the first place?
Back when I very first started on the case, it was going to be a fairly typical case, large case, but a pretty typical case that would be done in a lot of places in the country. But at this particular place, the thing that was unusual was we had a split between the state government and the federal government over the approach to take. And it became more and more important that the federal government continued to move forward. And so I felt almost compelled to move forward even against the obstacles.
So I was a newspaper reporter at the local Green Bay Press Gazette at the time, and it ended up really being the dominant story that I covered up there because of all the magnitude of the potential cleanup.
Most places where you have a Superfund site, the place is pretty ruined. It's usually a place where all sorts of terrible things have happened over the decades or centuries. This was a place where the Fox River was polluting this giant area of Green Bay. And Green Bay was this vibrant, beautiful, mostly untouched area, except for this constant flow of PCBs from the Fox River. And so Green Bay was probably the most important place in the country that could be saved by a Superfund project.
And I understand from reading the book, the PCB was hard to detect at first, right? Because the fishes they don't automatically die or bloat up and float up to the surface. But why do you both feel like it's important for people to know the environmental situation that was going on there?
As you say, PCBs are not like an oil spill where everything's just covered in oil and dead. And it's not like an acute poisoning like lead poisoning or something where everything just falls over dead. Instead, what makes this a dramatic site is that it's such a huge area, 1,500 square miles of water, contaminated for many, many decades, and hundreds of thousands of people fishing this place and hunting at this place and recreating in this place. And so it's like this insidious, constant problem over this giant area in a very long time. And even though it didn't kill stuff outright, it caused all of these subtle effects over such a large area and for such a long time that's why it's such an important site. And like you say, you can't see the PCBs, you can't smell them, but they cause all of these problems.
I wanted to jump in there and say that was kind of the challenge as a reporter. And I used to talk with and go to conferences with old environmental reporters. They reported about pollution in the 70s. And they would always talk about what a much easier story it was to tell back then because fish were dying, they were belly up in the water, things were covered with oil, the Cuyahoga River had flames leaping from it. So the environmental story of the 70s was really an easy story to tell. By the time fast forward into the 90s, a lot of the environmental progress had cleaned up a lot of the visible pollution. A lot of people thought that our environment was okay. Problem solved, we can move on and not deal with cleanups anymore. The fact is, a lot of the environmental pollution today is much more insidious. It's invisible. So one of the things that makes it really difficult is getting the public on board to support them, to understand that even though the water looks clean and the air looks clean, that there's still a lot of serious environmental degradation going on that's harmful to fish, to wildlife, and ultimately to humans.
How long does a cleanup like that take, and how do you get the audience or the people to understand what's going on, especially when you're fighting an invisible opponent in a sense?
That's a great question. You remember I said that when we started, there was a split between the state and the federal governments, and that set up this very unusual situation where agencies were basically fighting with each other. During that fight, for the first basically 10 years of the case, the question was, is it going to be a Superfund site or not? Is it going to be a great big cleanup or not? And to answer that question, we had to find out what the public thought. And it was the public getting on board and starting to see this less as a threat to their employment and more a help to their local economy and their local environment. And so it's a 30 or 40-year process in this case to get the public on board, to get the agencies on board, to then get the legal system on board, and then to do the engineering and work to actually clean up the site.
You know, I want to get into the book real quick, and David, you speak about at least to me it was scary, like being haunted by an emerging story of a death of a man by the name of Tom Monfils. What triggered you after hearing a story like that? If you can explain it to us.
Sure. So, you know, the thing that was strange about the Tom Monfils murder was it was a case where a small group of people got angry at a fellow worker over being turned in over some stolen electric wire. And the way they took care of that is they tied a 40-pound weight around his neck and threw him in a paper vat and killed him. And that case so that happened when I started. The same year I started is the year that happened. And the facts of this case emerged in my first 2 or 3 years in the trial, and they convicted these 6 people on a conspiracy and murder. And this was at a paper mill. And that wasn't one of the paper mills I was specifically going after for the cleanup, but it was the same unions, the same workers. And, you know, to kill somebody over a stolen piece of wire when we were bringing what could have been $1 billion case just made the sweat come out of my forehead because, you know, what were these people going to think in these mills about somebody, you know, coming after them for $1 billion if they were willing to do that? And so again, it wasn't directly part of the case. There was nobody on my team that was involved in any of that, but it sure made me think twice.
Word. It definitely will give you a pause. One electrical cord versus something that could be $1 billion worth. You know, it would give me hesitation too. And Susan, I want to ask you about a meeting that you said you had with the Superfund opponent. You described it as a David versus Goliath moment. Why was that?
Because literally David and others at Fish and Wildlife, basically, you know, they were federal regulators working in kind of a ragtag office up in Green Bay, and they were up against multi-billion-dollar paper mill corporations that had a lot at stake. It was a potentially very expensive prospect to clean up the river, and there was a lot of pushback from the mills, the paper companies, that they didn't want to be held liable for this. And they had a very strong public relations arm, a lot of money, not just in Green Bay, but coming up from, you know, elsewhere, their headquarters elsewhere around the country, in the world. And it was basically David and his team, and it extended beyond Fish and Wildlife, we're up against very formidable opponents, and that's why I characterized it as kind of a David and Goliath situation.
What would you say was the key to your success? What enabled you guys to really break through and win this fight?
Well, there's a lot of different factors involved. First of all, this site, more than probably any other site in the country, had been studied intensively by groups of experts, bird injury experts, PCB fate and transport modeler experts. And so there were decades and decades of information about the PCB problem that were all coming together at once. We were able to tap into that to make a case that actually was substantive, that had real information behind it. The second factor is almost never do agencies fight with each other like they did at this site. And because of that fight between the state and the feds, it actually catapulted the site in the federal government's eyes to one of the biggest sites in the country instead of a place where a state was already handling it. And so the fact that we had a intergovernmental fight with a lot of information available meant that it was the right time to strike. It meant that in 1992 to 1994, we could bring all of this together. We could bring the attention because of the dispute. and we could rely on the information that had been brought together over all those years.
One thing that we hadn't really mentioned, and I wanted to mention it, is that Green Bay had a very active environmental community that predated, David and me, and they had been on this issue for years, and they were ready too. And I think when you ask about how did you convince the public to get on board? How did you get the support of people wanting this cleanup to happen? A lot of it really, the local environmental community and the community at large that ultimately supported the cleanup really played a large role in the success of that.
I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And thank you so much for writing this book. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome.